So before I start, when I left Becton Dickinson in the year 2019, and that was after they had just acquired C.R. Bard, I had spent the last 7 years at C.R. Bard running Lutonix. Lutonix was the biggest acquisition of a startup company for C.R. Bard at the time. And they had just completed a first-in-human phase study, and they were just getting ready to start enrollment in their pivotal study. That small business continued to be the most highly profiled little piece of the big C.R. Bard because of it was a first of its kind technology. And the analysts were all after us, trying to find out what's going on, how the investment is going. So it was a very exciting time, and to put that through a PMA and also panel review, first of its kind technology in the US, it was really a huge accomplishment with an amazing team. So in 2019, I'm looking back. At that point, I had launched 8 of the 10 biggest launches in the history of C.R. Bard in terms of products. And I was wondering, what is the next thing going to be? And I knew for sure it wasn't going to be just a job. It had to be something that created impact. And this is really where we are today. So in that same year, 2019, it turns out that there were 226 million women worldwide that were diagnosed with having the condition of uterine fibroids. That is almost 6% of women in the world. And 70 to 80% of them 70 to 80% of women, no matter where you look, will develop uterine fibroids by the age of 50. Now, 20 to 30% of women, of those who develop the fibroids, will be symptomatic. Their fibroids will be symptomatic. So what are uterine fibroids? They're basically benign tumors, but they're the leading cause of hospitalization related to any gynecological disorder. Black women have more severe symptoms, and they tend to have the onset of the condition is earlier in younger ages in Black women. In the US alone, there is more than 1 million women treated. In fact, some numbers put them close to 2 million every year are being treated in the US alone. And 70% of those women who are receiving treatment are actually on some sort of therapeutic plan. So that's mostly hormones, otherwise some sort of management of pain. There are 400,000 surgeries specific because of uterine fibroids in the US alone. And 70 to 75% of these surgeries for uterine fibroids are hysterectomies. In fact, the average age for a hysterectomy in the US is between 40 and 42, which is very young. I hope you agree. There are 26 million women in the US today between the ages of 15 and 50 who have uterine fibroids. Now, I don't know when was the last time you looked at a condition, medical condition or disease state where you saw numbers this high. So again, what are uterine fibroids? They are basically benign tumors, but they can get large enough and they get a woman may get multiple tumors that they actually become problematic and symptomatic. They can be as small as a 1 centimeter in diameter. They can be as large as 10 centimeter in diameter. And there are many symptoms, just to name a few of them here. The normal menstrual cramps that women suffer the pain monthly with their cycle, the heavy bleeding, which leads to severe anemia, and truly perhaps the most impactful is when it interferes with fertility, which it does. And often it actually causes a lot of bladder and bowel disorders. So these symptoms cannot be neglected for too long once a woman becomes symptomatic. So most prevalent treatment, as I just showed you, is actually hysterectomy. The other treatment options are not that great. They have limitations, and their limitations is they have very high risk of complications, number one, and I can go in details about what they are, but I'm going to touch on the main ones. And most of them offer very poor outcomes, either temporary relief or basically high risk, that basically a price to be paid for having a treatment. Emerging technologies are very difficult to use. They are not widely adopted because they are just very difficult to use by an average gynecologist, which is where a patient goes to seek help. And that's why you see so many hysterectomies. What are the treatment options? I mentioned that already more than 70% of women who are diagnosed are on some sort of therapeutic treatment. The majority of them are on hormone therapy. There is you probably have heard about, either they call it UAE or uterine fibroid embolization, where the blood supply to the uterus is basically blocked. There is ablation, which doesn't even treat the fibroid itself. It just relieves some of the bleeding. And as I mentioned, there is hysterectomy, the most dominant and actually most offered surgical option for women. And then there is myomectomy. Myomectomy is actually the golden standard of care for uterine preservation, specifically for women with childbearing, in childbearing age, meaning if they want to preserve their ability to have children. So not only preserve their uterus, but they want to make sure they're able to have children, get pregnant after that. It's a minimally invasive procedure. It could be abdominal, it could be laparoscopic. So the abdominal procedure was first described in the 1800s. And today we're in the year 2022. So I hope you see that the gap is quite huge. Laparoscopic myomectomy was first described in the late 70s. And really there was not much written about it. There were some truly brave physicians trying it. And then I think the last publication around it, where anything happened with it, was in the early 90s. In fact, it was 91 or 92. So why aren't more gynecologists doing laparoscopic myomectomy or myomectomy in general? Well, it's a very difficult procedure. You're going in and you have to basically resect the fibroid. So you're creating a defect on the wall of the uterus. So then you have to have some very high suturing skills where you're actually going to go on and try and repair the defect you just created. So you are not compromising. You've already compromised the integrity of the uterus wall. So you're trying now to suture that defect you created to make sure that the uterus actually is maintaining some sort of structural integrity. Well, that is very difficult to do, and even more difficult to do laparoscopically. There's limited options of removal of fibroids. Why is that? And again, some of you may have heard about the big warning around morcellators. So morcellators used to suck these, basically chop them up, the fibroids, and suck them out. But the problem is that if there is any cancerous tissue, then you're spreading cancer. And there was a case that was very publicized. And then after that, FDA issued that warning for a surgeon herself who went in to have the surgery and ended up with having a sarcoma tissue basically going everywhere, and she died shortly after as a result of that procedure. So one thing you will notice, there's definitely since then a trend in the US specifically, and then Europe followed, a decrease in the use of morcellators and also scalpels. The wound may that may be produced so even if the defect is sutured really well, you still have a wound and there will be adhesions. These adhesions could basically obstruct the fallopian tubes, so basically it makes pregnancy impossible. And then the last but not least, the risk of rupture of the uterus itself. So this is the golden standard of care. If a woman goes through a myomectomy today, this is what she walks away with. I hope you agree with me that this is unacceptable. If a woman wants to preserve her options for having children, then this is what she has. This is what she has to go through. This is a public health issue. There are many nonprofit organizations who are tackling the issue, who are talking about it. There's actually a Senate bill in the US that speaks to it, that is on the floor, has been on the floor for a year. And this data I show you from 2011, the direct cost just of uterine fibroid procedures is between 4 and 9 billion. But if you talk about the down the road complications, it's up to $34 billion. That's in the US alone. So this is what we're doing about it. So Empress procedure involves no cutting and therefore no defects, no compromising of the uterus wall. Truly, what we believe the most important thing is designed for gynecologists. It builds on the skill sets that gynecologists already have. So if they know how to do laparoscopic surgery, this is going to be much easier than myomectomy. These are not my words. These are the words of some key opinion leaders in the US I interviewed. Very simple steps is, again, it's semi-automated, the actual, when we say suturing here, we're not trying to close a defect. We're actually, we're suturing around the fibroid to cause ischemia, the very same principle that's done with embolization. So what's happening, we're depriving by applying pressure on the circumferential surface of the fibroid, we're actually depriving it of that blood supply and we're increasing the pressure. And it is similar what happens when you do embolization of the main artery to the uterus. That's actually what happens with the fibroid itself. We have done a first in human study in the Dominican Republic, and we have demonstrated, by the way, the study was actually published in a peer-reviewed journal just this August, and that's Reproductive Sciences. We've demonstrated at 3 months a reduction, more than 36% in the volume of the fibroid, and at 1 year, more than 60%. That 60% is actually higher what's in the literature when you compare it to UAE. So it's pretty significant reduction. In some patients, that reduction of volume was up to 80%. We had 100% procedural success. So we had 5 different physicians actually try the procedures on between the 16 patients, and we had 100% procedural success. Patients reported improvement in quality of life in different aspects. We had 0 adverse events, and there was a very short recovery time, and a very positive safety profile with the device, and improved quality of life, as I said, at 3 months. So what does that look like in terms of opportunity in the US? So there's over 1 million. I said there are close to 2 million actually. So, but if you just look at the over 1 million women receiving that treatment, that's an opportunity of $3.5 billion. US alone. Bottom-up market opportunity initially, if you just look at the surgeries, the surgical portion of the market, that's 1.4 billion. In Europe, there are actually 24 million women who are diagnosed with the condition, and worldwide there are 7 million women actively receiving treatment. This is where we are. We are actually gearing up to start a clinical trial. It's an IDE de novo, and we will run the trial primarily in the US. We are looking at a center in Europe, and we are on track to start this clinical trial early in 2023. This round, Series A, we're raising 10 million, and it will take us to approval and making the clinical trial, approval of the IDE, and releasing the device for commercialization. Our team, I already told you a bit about myself. The team is actually the team that worked on the initial design of the product is based in Tel Aviv. I am a US employee, and the clinical team and the commercialization team is coming from the US. Board of directors, we have Dr. Arbach himself was the president of Cooper Surgical, that's very active in the space of women's health. And then I must mention that Dr. Tal himself was actually, he's an interventional radiologist. He's a serial entrepreneur. This is his 5th company, I believe, if not 6th. And he's developed a number of medical devices. He himself has performed hundreds of UAE embolization procedures. So he has dealt with the fibroids themselves. He's actually seen the patients, he's heard their complaints, he's watched them basically agonize with making a decision, what is the best treatment option I have. I showed you basically what we are doing, and now why are we doing it? We're really doing it because we want to change the standard of care for the treatment of fibroids and make fertility preservation an ongoing option and not the exception. You can look us up at empressmed.com. Thank you.